but rather than where Utah is. But I believe
being sent to one or more apps.
Good. I'm glad
Should I
that's
say okay?
yes, yeah. We have redirected the stream to YouTube, and it looks like we may be live now on YouTube. So if you can hear me, welcome to the, wait, one more person is coming in. Welcome, John Pren, in a second here. So this is the Utah campaign to abolish nuclearism. We've just begun a live stream on YouTube. And today is our fifth in a series of webinars, video webinars that are focused on helping us understand what's happening with nuclearism and what we can do to stop the violence of nuclear weapons. Today we have Taylor Barnes, who's been with us on a few of our other ones. John, can you hear us?
Yes.
Great. And Doug, you can hear us too, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about the Sentinel program that the Northrop Grumman has been working on and that the state of Utah has helped fund. Taylor can hopefully speak a little bit about the funding, I think, maybe, and
yes.
where, like, they just don't do it based on their own pocketbook. They have to have an income stream like any other weapons contractor. So hearing a little bit about that would be good, as well as the hope that the income stream will disappear for that particular program. So again, welcome everybody. Emma, Claire, Jean, John, Taylor, of course, and Doug to the event. Take it away, Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and hi, everyone. I already know Doug. I think this is the first time I've met Jean and John, so it's a pleasure to meet you guys.
Hi, Taylor.
Yes, nice. So I'm a journalist based in Atlanta, but I go to Utah pretty frequently to report on the nuclear weapons industry, particularly, of course, Northrop Grumman. And yeah, there's sort of many angles into the story. My outlet, Inkstick Media, we cover endless war, global security, but our sort of defining feature is that we do so without accepting any funds from defense contractors like Northrop Grumman or government entities that could color or distort our views. And that may sound like a technicality, but it's extremely common in the sort of defense national security reporting space. So yeah, I also invited Emma Claire along today, who I know through sort of broader nuclear weapons circles, knowing that she wants to keep connecting with grassroots activists. I thought maybe both Emma Claire and I together could kind of give a little overview of sort of state of play of the ICBM and Sentinel and some of the sort of varying comments and trying to read the tea leaves of the missile's future. Emma Claire, just kind of pipe in whatever you like, 'cause I even think you'll have plenty of information on this, but so of course, Sentinel is the new intercontinental ballistic missile that's being produced in facilities across Utah. The most important facilities for it are in Clearfield and Magna and up in Promontory in the West Desert. And also there's a new corporate office, corporate engineering office for Northrop Grumman at Hill Air Force Base that you guys can see if you ever visit the museum at Hill Air Force Base. And yeah, this is the land-based missile in the United States nuclear weapons arsenal. High profile, controversial, even folks who otherwise aren't necessarily opposed to nuclear weapons as a concept will nonetheless describe this weapon as a particularly, obsolete, antiquated, hair trigger way to use nuclear weapons. And also going back in time, many years, another reason why it's very controversial is because it was a non-competitive bid on this project, i.e. Northrop Grumman was the only bidder on this now very exorbitantly priced missile. Last year, it notched cost overruns that triggered a special congressional review that could have led to its cancellation. However, basically the Department of Defense signed off, described it as critical for national security, and the missile goes forward. Flash forward to the confirmation hearing for the current Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. He affirmed the United States is very committed to quote unquote modernizing, i.e., replacing, restocking every part of its nuclear weapons arsenal, including this missile. That said, nonetheless, not long after that, when the Trump administration put out an executive order and a bit of a press release about over budget weapons projects, it name checked this one as one that could be canceled and has taken some confusing moves, such as pausing design work for new silos across the American West and life extending the current missile that this missile would replace. So that's kind of some of the murky state of play. I'll let Emma Claire add anything to that context about sort of just the murkiness of this missile's future.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I mean, I always turn to Taylor's work for a sense of what's actually happening on the ground with this, because it can be so hard to be even, reading the news or like even listening to things more close to the ground and really understand what's going on, because this industry is so opaque. And to understand the role of ICBMs in US, I guess, defense strategy, or but also the US economy, and the way we think about ourselves as a country with nuclear weapons requires holding a lot of contradictions in your head at once. So I'm really happy to be here and sort of together tracing like the status quo as through all these different threads. I can add a little bit about just the deeper logic of why the ICBM doesn't make sense as a part of the US nuclear arsenal, and why many experts from many different sort of ideological bents and walks of life see it as making the United States and the world overall less safe. I'm not sure how much of this you all know. I'm sort of presuming just going to say it all together, and we can discuss. But the current missile, the ICBMs were placed in the field, right, in the 5 states where they are in the early 1960s, and they were kind of this first big land-based anchor for the U.S. What we call the nuclear triad, right? The land, sea, and air-based missiles. There's been a lot of work done on the degree to which this was kind of just a haphazard arrangement, that the form of the missiles, where they're placed, as sort of as close to the North Pole as possible in the continental United States, their size, the way they're kept in the silos, were all kind of a response to the capabilities of the time and like the conditions that were available to nuclear planners at that time. And the ICBM force, and again, as Taylor said, you'll get these criticisms from people who see no problem with the indefinite existence of nuclear weapons. But the ICBM force kind of maintains these conditions, right? Just out of a weird, almost institutional frozenness, or like just a strange, tradition almost. But so we basically, we have this force of nuclear weapons in the United States, which was originally designed to kind of counter a parallel force. Maybe not. I mean, ultimately, this is what arose, like to counter a parallel force in the Soviet Union, then later in Russia, and now is seen as a kind of, a non-ideal weapon for a much larger range of threats, but one that in the imagination of US nuclear war planners seems to be too risky to give up, right? Because we have this, and when I say we, I guess I mean they have this, I think, mentality which has become stronger and stronger in even recent decades, that the goal has to be to kind of match the absolute imaginable maximum of other countries' nuclear weapons, right? And there's some kind of vulnerability to going for a lesser number, even if there's a clear sense that strategically that would make sense for the United States nuclear policy. This all is also downstream from like the incredible profits that these systems generate. But basically with the ICBMs, once they're launched, they cannot be recalled. And the decision time that the president is given to make that choice is quite short, right? And so there have been dozens of documented near misses or moments where poorly interpreted intelligence or just a mistake, a training video left in by accident was one common example. A shadow over the moon, I think the most poetic one, nearly caused what we would call an accidental first strike. Using the ICBM force. So in that sense, that's kind of the root of this argument that the ICBMs make the countries that have them less safe, right? Because then that sort of guarantees that the people who have them would be subject to an equally destructive second strike. So just a little context there, and I'll let Taylor continue.
Okay.
Wow. That was great. Yeah, I guess also, and I don't know if Emma, Claire, if you also want to pop in just about sort of this, like I said, this kind of uncertain climate of these mixed statements, which is, par for the course for a Trump administration. Um, you know, on the one hand saying, I mean, also came into office saying, when the time is ready, we're going to renegotiate nuclear weapons reduction, or, reduction of the arsenals with Russia and China. And then next he says, actually, no, we're going to build a golden dome, so we're going to be invulnerable to their missiles anyway. So yeah, I basically, I mean, I suppose my analysis is, rather than take Trump at his words, look at his past actions, and the military-industrial complex flourished under Trump 1, and I strongly believe it's going to flourish under Trump 2. And that while it's, can be somewhat meaningful to see him name check this missile in particular, and for example, life extend the current missile, which would be a suggestion that perhaps this current new missile wouldn't be needed. I'm not particularly, I'm not particularly expecting that to occur.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really right. I've been trying to wrap my mind around what, if anything, is the Trump administration's approach to nuclear policy and defense spending. And I mean, I think the one principle we can say is maximizing spending is kind of the goal with I would say still less of a concern for what actually comes out of it. I mean, even if you're not immersed in the ICBM issue and the cost overruns and the complexity and just the apparent it's apparently overwhelming, right? The capacities of the institutions tasked with dealing with it. And then you look at the Golden Dome proposal and you're like, it just shows you just how unreasonable that is from every possible level, right? That even fundamentally as a project, how beyond the current capacities it is, and then the money they're committing to it, how just ridiculously inadequate that would be, to even approach creating something like what they're envisioning, right? And so but I mean, the interesting thing about listening to Trump, if we can call it that, is that it does kind of give you a new perspective on all these things that we talk about that are true, right? About the real vulnerabilities of the ICBM, right? About the real difficulties of replacing it, about the real insanity of a missile defense system of the size he's envisioning, right?
Right.
Is the missile defense system that you're talking about, is that what the Golden Dome is?
The Golden Dome, yeah. This idea of basically a missile defense system that would cover the entire United States, kind of modeled on
Reagan,
the Israeli defense system, and then also this idea from Reagan, which is sort of a chestnut of American conservative thought for 40 years.
I see you, John. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, this brings up a question. When you mentioned the Golden Dome, doesn't that imply that they know that the ICBMs are not going to keep us safe? If there were a launch and a reciprocal launch, we're going to be screwed. So we have to have a dome that prevents us from being injured by it. So they're actually coming right out and basically saying what we're planning now is nuts because it doesn't defend us at all. So we need a Golden Dome on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think vulnerability and strength, to go into the sort of the poetics of the way that nuclear weapons are talked about are kind of constant. Both of those are constantly present in all of these, right? That something about the size and magnitude of the ICBM is what's always, brought up as the reason that we need it, even though it's like the secret argument underneath it is this idea of like profound collective sacrifice, right? That like it doesn't necessarily matter in that logic, right? That like the amount of destruction and like just death that like an ICBM strike would cause, right? But in that logic, there's this idea of sort of defending the United States as something that I think extends beyond the life of its people, right? Or even the things that exist in the United States and make up the
Yeah.
United States. It's really, when you really dig into it, it's a very strange, it's much stranger even than for me, I assume at face value.
Yeah. So even just to go off on what you just said, John, I feel like it will be terrific, when Trump or when Hegseth or someone takes questions in a press scrum. If someone says, you're touting this golden dome that Trump said on, in his Oval Office announcement would quote unquote work perfectly. Does that also mean you're pursuing nuclear disarmament, given that you claim it's going to work perfectly? Though, I mean, of course, and also just to get, of course, as you know, into the parochial and the sort of kleptocratic politics of it all. Like the three companies that are leading contenders to participate in it are all close Trump allies, of course. SpaceX from Elon Musk, Peter Thiel with Palantir, a Republican mega donor, Anduril, whose founder is very explicitly Republican. So, yeah, of course, it's also correct to understand it in that context. I wanted to go a bit through just some of the local public happenings that are occurring around nuclear weapons, particularly in Utah, but also a little bit beyond, just to sort of get people up to speed of what's occurring. Um, so just maybe a week or two ago, in Montana, the Air Force held quote unquote Sentinel town halls in 3 locations with the purpose of updating the local publics about the status of the project, of where the ICBM silos will be. And what I was able to have a local reporter record it for me and send the audio. And my sort of takeaway from it was, I guess, 2 things. Um, One takeaway was, despite the Air Force being very assertive and sort of combating any sort of any sort of uncertainty about the future of this missile and saying, no, we're going full steam ahead with the Sentinel, do not doubt its future. They also had so little to say about the silo design and silo location. They were totally at the drawing board about where these silos will be, which just really suggests that this is going to be such a very delayed project. And so that jumped out to me, just how little information and how many question marks they had about where these silos will actually go. Two, there was some opposition from locals, on moral existential grounds. That said, the locals who spoke out in favor of Sentinel largely were not speaking out in a way I feel so very safe knowing that I live next to an ICBM. It was the bread and butter parochial concerns that everyone's familiar with. It was a local union saying they wanted to work on the construction projects for the temporary workers, for housing. Locals describing how the roads that lead to the silos are much better than the roads elsewhere in rural Montana. So I just think that's an important point when understanding sort of what local support for a project like this can look like. I think it often boils down to very bread and butter and day-to-day concerns, often more so than support for the actual weapon system in question. In addition to that, several, and a pretty David and Goliath story, several grassroots, small watchdog groups at nuclear weapon sites, such as Los Alamos, the Savannah River site in South Carolina. One reached a settlement with the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, basically saying to produce plutonium pits, which is the core of a warhead, you did not have appropriate environmental impact scoping sessions in all of the communities that will be implicated in that. And the plutonium production has been hazardous to human health and the environment in the past, such as in Rocky Flats in Colorado. And just this week, the NNSA, including tonight, is hosting virtual, sort of basically town halls, if you will, public meetings that allow people across the country, particularly in these communities, but actually, given that they're online, anyone can speak on them. So I listened in, and it was people outside of these communities as well, to basically speak about, tell the NNSA what they think needs to be included in an environmental impact statement about plutonium pit production. And it's really remarkable. I mean, it really is. I mean, I've listened into last night's, and it was almost uniformly everyone against plutonium pit production. We'll see what tonight's goes like. But it is just a remarkable sort of, yeah, a virtual town hall, if you will, almost like America, nationwide, of local public opinion on the new nuclear arms race. Also, anyone raise their hand and speak up if you have any thoughts and questions. Another local event I wanted to touch on that you guys in Utah will be aware of is the explosion at the Northrop Grumman plant in Promontory up in the West Desert in April. So that Northrop Grumman plant that if you guys ever drive through the West Desert, you'll see is a very remote location, which is by design, dating back to the 1950s when the chemical company sent out scouts looking for locations where they could conduct explosive tests in the Utah desert and came across this tract sort of near Brigham City. It has a history of explosions, including numerous worker deaths on, I believe, at least 3 locations and three different incidents. And exploded again in April. A building, in fact, just today I got a grammar request fulfilled from the Department of Utah Department of Environmental Quality, and which for the explosion, let me see how they describe the explosion. Fire started at oxidizer manufacturing facility, building M722. Staff evacuated before the explosion. 14,000 pounds of sodium chloride were involved in the incident. It's unknown how much of the material was consumed in the fire, how much was released. No material has been recovered, awaiting results from confirmation sampling. Anyhow, on an earnings call, the Northrop Grumman CEO, Kathy Warden, described the building that exploded as one that contributes to their space business as opposed to their, and not contributing to the Sentinel missile. That said, no matter what, in a plant like this that has a long history of explosions, it really, really raises red flags about safety, both for their workers. Indeed, I mean, these workers were evacuated. I mean, thank goodness their systems actually worked to, alert them and allow them to evacuate. But in the past, of course, there have been numerous worker deaths at this same plant. And I have been told the investigation is ongoing. The governor, Spencer Cox, told a news conference, I believe it was just the day after the explosion, that he had a quote unquote public safety team investigating the explosion. That said, I've sent off a bunch of grammar requests and a bunch of requests for comments, and I have found very little evidence that a quote unquote public safety team actually existed to investigate this. And I've been told just over and over again that Northrop Grumman is basically doing a self-investigation of the explosion. So I saw you raised your hand, Jean. Please speak up.
Mute. Why don't we get this in the news at all? Or is it in the news out west? Do they know about it in Utah? Or I know I lived in Wyoming for 4 years in the early 80s and heard about the plan to put the nuclear weapons, I guess, on trains or something and move them around so nobody knows where they are.
Right.
I don't know if that happened, but anyways, it's just like, we don't know what's going on.
I mean, that speaks of the location. This is the final assembly plant for the new intercontinental ballistic missile. It's off in the Utah's West Desert. I mean, I think you drive about an hour and a half approximately from Salt Lake City to get there, but it's quite remote, and that is by design because it is where they test these missiles. I will say the day of the explosion, just to give some background, local media did cover it, including a local outlet that flew a helicopter over and broadcast aerial images of the explosion. So those were valuable. So there was indeed some local media coverage. One local reporter, this is another question I was going to pose to any Utah residents, spoke with residents in Tremonton, which is I forget which direction it is from the plant, who said that they were 5 to 10 miles away from the plant, but felt the explosion in their homes, which speaks to just how enormous and how strong it was. So my question to anyone on this call was also just if you have any contacts in Tremonton, because I would reach out to them for a follow-up story to ask if they indeed felt. There was one local interview of one mother who said she felt the explosion.
John and Doug are definitely in Utah right now.
Yeah.
It would be the main Did you guys see when the news came out that Doug's muted right now? Doug's on the phone, so he might not be able to unmute. I'm not sure how that works with. Oh, he's got it unmuted. Hey, Doug.
Hi, Doug.
Hi. Hi, Taylor.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Have you ever, I was asking if you guys had any contacts in Tremonton, because local media reported that some people in Tremonton were able to feel the explosion.
We pronounce it Tremonton.
Tremonton. You know, I knew I was pronouncing it. I was gonna call it something else, and then when I heard at least one person, I pronounced it in a way that I knew was different. Anyhow, yeah, thank you.
Do you know if Taylor, since you've been looking into this from a journalistic point of view, do you know, or John or Doug, do you know if Utah has, or maybe even Claire knows about this with other states, cares at all about the Environmental Protection Agency? Or like when I used to live in California, once upon a time, there was seemed like there was a California version of that. Does Utah have any sort of environmental protection governmental agency that's either exists and or is not obedient to the fascists in the White House?
So in Utah, there indeed is the Utah Department of Environmental Quality. And they're the ones who sent me the report on the incident of the explosion. That said, how zealous are they into investigating versus how much are they relying on sort of Northrop Grumman's self-reporting? That I don't know. Yeah. I also wanted to bring up, this is kind of a question for Pegasus and everyone. If UCAN has any events coming up, we have a photographer who's going to do some nuclear weapons photography around the state. So if you guys have any protests, any vigils, we'd love to send the photographer to document it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's the timing on that?
I think some between now and August or so.
Oh, John, go ahead, John.
Apropos of environmental impact, I think I heard somewhere that Sentinel passed its environmental impact evaluation, and that's based on the environmental impact of manufacturing the things and putting them, whatever Northrop is going to do. It has nothing to do with the environmental impact of what happens if they're ever used as intended.
Yeah.
So environmental impact is kind of a shady.
That basically came up a lot in these the NNSA sort of giant nationwide town halls I mentioned earlier, where folks were saying, you're asking us about the environmental impact on our community, but we also want the statement to include, the environmental impact of when these things are actually used one day. So yeah.
Well, they can't do that.
Right.
They can't tell you that.
Right.
Go ahead, Jean.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And I just wondering if I haven't seen too many, members in Utah, but I think that's a good organization that will, bring people together to oppose nuclear weapons development.
Also, in terms of upcoming events, since the 80th anniversary is coming of the Trinity bomb, as well as the Hiroshima and Nagasaki detonation. Right. And we talked about it a little bit last year when we went out for Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day with Tosh Kano, the local survivor, Hibakusha. He's not able to join us today on this Zoom because he's at his granddaughter's graduation from a young grade school age. Anyway, so I don't know if Tosh is going to be leading something or organizing something, but that's why we'll follow up when we do. And again, the photographer, is it just a photographer coming out to Utah, or?
I think we were hoping to hire a local photographer to go to a few different sites. So, yeah.
What, and again, when is that, you said earlier?
Basically sometime between now and like approximately August.
Of course, for the 80th anniversary, get it in the news
Yeah.
as everybody's going to be thinking about that.
Right.
Could you repeat what the 80th anniversary is again? Of
The first 3 nuclear explosions in the Trinity test in New Mexico, and then the 2 bombs in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Oh, right.
Also known as the end of World War II. So it's one of those other taglines in that.
Right. A few other sort of local happenings just to touch on. I've been told, but I haven't seen this officially published anywhere, but that in June, that the Promontory plant in Utah is going to do another one of its static tests, and that it will be for a NASA rocket. And I was told that it would attract up to 2,000 people who come to who will like onlookers to watch the test. So like again, I haven't seen this actually published anywhere, but something to keep an eye on, because as you guys know, these static tests kind of can become sort of local events off in the West Desert. I guess 2 other things. An attorney has, I published last year an expose that was on the cover of the Salt Lake City Weekly that was about the LDS Church and its investment manager called Ensign Peak, which you guys may be familiar with because there was a lot of hullabaloo and sort of controversy when it came to light that basically the LDS Church had been concealing its finances through the use of shell companies. And then I believe it was around 2019, 2020 through whistleblowers, investigative journalism, a settlement with the Securities and Exchange Commission, basically had to come clean about both the sort of the size of its wealth and the fact that it has a large investment manager called Ensign Peak, which is next to the City Creek Mall in Salt Lake City. Pegasus has been very close to the offices. Anyhow, the purpose of our story was an expose on Ensign Peak holding stock in basically all of the top nuclear weapons publicly traded companies, which is something that many mainline churches do not do, and they have explicit sin screens related to that. And so an attorney has told me that she is searching for Mormon plaintiffs who could be interested in challenging the church over its stock holdings. So if anyone is friendly with anyone in the LDS Church who follows nuclear weapons issues, you can flag them. And finally, Pegasus had asked about Utah state subsidies to Northrop Grumman. So basically, as you guys probably know, the world of quote unquote economic development, which is what you're seeing when you see, pictures in the newspaper of executives and politicians with big scissors doing a ribbon cutting ceremony. Very often that is the sort of keyword that means either a local government or a state government has offered some sort of a subsidy to the company, i.e. tax breaks, i.e. grants, i.e. property tax abatements, whatever it may be. And then the state or local government will claim that they quote unquote incentivized the company to come to that given location when they could have gone elsewhere. So Utah did this for Northrop Grumman for the new intercontinental ballistic missile. That said, there actually are not many places in the U.S. to produce intercontinental ballistic missiles. And, the U.S. military, the U.S. has been producing them in Promontory since the 50s. So even though Utah's economic development officials claimed that this was, they incentivized Northrop Grumman to come here, there's a question, where else would the company actually have gone? So I was able to obtain through grammar request in part the state of Utah's contract for worth $60 million in tax breaks to subsidize Northrop Grumman's Sentinel ICBM. However, the government is insisting on redacting a key part of the contract, so we sued them. We've been in court. The government also refuses to supply quote unquote performance reports. So Northrop Grumman claims it will create 2,250 jobs on the ICBM. However, they won't actually release the paper trail that proves that. And so we've also sued them trying to get that. Finally, last year, the government quietly announced it had yet a new contract with Northrop Grumman, that the first contract was called Project Unity 1. They called this one Project Unity 2. They quietly passed it, and it's a much higher number. I believe it's 90 million or 100 million in state subsidies, and will not tell me, despite all my questions, despite my grammar request, what this new contract is for. Is it simply an additional amount in addition to the original 59 to 60 million that was offered to the company? So anyhow, we're in some, we've been having sort of public records legal battles trying to get clarity on basically how much the Utah taxpayer is subsidizing Northrop Grumman and its ICBM business.
Right. Can you tell me if you know the current generation of that is already existing and deployed in those silos, were they all? You just enlightened me a minute ago that some of them were built in Utah, and I'm just wondering. It was before Northrop Grumman existed when the first ones were being.
Yeah.
But anyway, what were the plants there? And is that what, are you saying that some of the plants that still exist, 50 years later, are now being reactivated? Is that what you're indicating with Promontory?
Well, no, really. So I believe, though I'd have to look back for more clarity. I believe during the Cold War there was a few more locations that could make something like an ICBM. Emma Claire can add on more if she knows more. And that after the Cold War, some of these plants consolidated, closed down. And that Promontory plant indeed was only purchased by Northrop Grumman in like the 2010s or something. And before that it was Orbital ATK. Before that it was Theocol. Same with the Magna plant, which was originally owned by Hercules. So nowadays, really, Emma Claire needs to pipe in if you have any other knowledge. I believe there really is largely no other place in the United States to manufacture an ICBM and to perform static tests like are performed in Promontory, which is then why the premise of the Economic Development Agreement is suspect, because these authorities are claiming they incentivized the company to come here when it's unclear where else they ever could have gone.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, John.
I'm just thinking, since these projects, Sentinel particularly, are for national defense, national security, it isn't very patriotic for these companies to be making a profit on it, right? They should say, well, we're going to do it, but we're not going to make any money. We're going to just do it on a cost basis. And the same for the Golden Dome.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be making a profit. So maybe that's what we should bring up, would say, look, you're profiteering off this patriotic endeavor that you're in. You should make zero profit from it. And you should subscribe to, you should pledge that you won't make a dime. We'll cover your costs. You won't make a dime on it, extra profit. So it won't affect your stock price. All your investors won't be making any money at all. It's just for national defense. That's the patriotic. See what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because I have that can sound just sort of absurd to stay in the context of the modern day military industrial complex, but that actually has precedent, because one of my favorite industry stories is about the DuPont Corporation, which was a sort of a chemical company that produced both consumer products like nylon tights and also set up the Savannah Riverside, a nuclear weapons facility in rural South Carolina. But after the what was it called, the Nye Committee on whatever it's called, excess wartime profits or something like that from World War I, when many companies had their sort of reputations named and shamed and in the public eye for excessive profits off of munitions during World War I. Companies like DuPont were afraid that making a profit off of weapons would dampen their consumer business for things like those nylon tights that I mentioned. And therefore the DuPont Corporation reluctantly agreed to construct and manage the SRS, but only on the condition that it make no profit. Which is just, unthinkable nowadays, but actually has a precedent.
Yeah, so 100 years ago, when there was a potentially a better sense of socialism in our country, and maybe a higher value for pacifism back then, something was going on with before we were a full empire and needed to dominate the rest of the universe or the planet or whatever. There was still a slight bit room for humility.
Right. And John, you're also really right about the sort of patriotic marketing that goes along with the defense contractors. I mean, when you go to the likes of a Northrop Grumman facility, there's a giant American flag on the outside. I've been told on the inside of a variety of defense contractor facilities, you'll see images of wounded veterans. You'll see, images of veterans in general, with the strong marketing and suggestion being you're here to support the troops, which, yeah, they're also there to make a lot of money. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's fascinating.
Well, thank you, Taylor and Emma Claire for spending time with us today. What kinds of steps, especially from John and from Doug, any other ideas of John? You had some good ideas for what the corporations could do, but what can we do as civilians who care and want to do more? And I wish Tosh was here to talk about the 80th anniversary coming up. But any ideas from Doug or John for upcoming steps for publicizing more about the stupidity of Northrop Grumman, as well as the Sentinel program locally in Utah?
Well, I hope Doug has some good ideas.
And if not,
one interesting thing.
We meet twice a month, so everybody's welcome to join us for our meetings. They're all online now. Go ahead, Doug.
One interesting thing I actually observed when I worked at Hill Air Force Base, I actually was sent out to the test range to observe the static firings of the Minuteman missile different stages.
Woof.
Yeah.
They wanted me to bring in the tapes. I could have gone up to Hill Air Force Base and got a government vehicle, but I had a Volkswagen Beetle and I just drove from my house out to the test range and back.
Mm.
Well, I think we need to.
Is that? Are you done, Doug?
Okay, you can go ahead.
I think if you look at the statistics from UCAN, they found that globally, something like 68% of people want to get rid of nuclear weapons completely or over the earth. And even in the US, I think it's more than 50%. It's 53% or something. Don't remember what the thing is. So it's actually a minority that's holding us hostage on this and globally. And I don't know if that's pointed out very much because the signatories to the TPNW are almost all the countries in the world besides the nuclear weapons holders. Isn't that right? So if you've got it, if you've got them, you're going to grip them to your cold dead hands, right? But on the other hand, your neighbor doesn't want them going off next door.
Right.
Yeah. On the screen share, for those of you that can see your screen, we did put this out a year or two ago, and we should probably continue, maybe update that if there's any new updates for what's happening. Oh yeah, like Taylor said earlier, down here towards the bottom says Northrop Grumman got the $13 billion contract from the Air Force.
Yeah.
And there it says Utah. It doesn't mention the first dose of money that it got from Utah and the second dose, but specifically when they're not getting actual cash inflow from Ensign Peak, or how does investments work? I mean, it's just a stock. Is it just symbolic? And then when Northrop Grumman does make a profit, then Ensign Peak profits, and therefore the more research profits? Or did they actually put money? What does it mean to buy stock? And it just keep afloat.
Basically, so Ensign Peak owns a variety of different kinds of assets, but the ones that they are required to report to the government, to the Securities and Exchange Commission, are the stocks that they hold. And in reality, this is why I think this is important to report out. The size of its portfolio is enormous, and the amount that it holds in weapons and war stocks is actually not that large. They could dump it tomorrow and still be extremely wealthy. But by the time they should have, I mean, I'm speaking frankly, they should have done that before they had to publicize their holdings. They should have done that back in 2019, 2020, because now we can all see it if they do it. So now they have to 4 times a year, every quarter, file what's called a Form 13F to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So if they ever make any sort of a qualitative change to their investments, i.e. dumping all of the nuclear weapons contractors, we'll all be able to see it. They can very well do it, and it would be meaningless basically for their actual portfolio.
Right, in terms of their wealth and what they're doing.
In terms of
the symbology and the fact that they support it with their money, which symbolic of energy or heart or something, karma, whatever. When is the next 13F going to be reported?
I have to say that there was one reported just recently. I looked at it probably a week or two ago, so now it's about 3 months out. They're easy to find. They're you Google Form 13F Ensign Peak. You can find them both on the SEC's website or all these sort of number crunching websites that basically are sort of almost like investment advice websites. But yeah, that's part of why we reported the story. I find it remarkable that they are holding on to those stocks when, like I said, it seems like it would be a very small loss for them because they're actually not a high dollar value compared to how much they have in companies like Amazon and whatnot, Apple, all the other other major companies. Pegasus, I think someone asked a question about what should we do at the local level. I don't know if Emma Claire wanted to chime in about sort of what kind of things you've been seeing other activists doing at the local level.
I mean, I think you're all in a unique position because you're so close to the heart of the development of new nuclear weapons, and even the fact of like having this major explosion that like people are able to feel like gives reality to nuclear weapons that I think is a difficult hurdle to overcome for many activists. So I would look to Utah for guidance, I think, for the rest of the world. But I just wanted to put in a plug for anybody who is planning an action, who needs resources or maybe connections with other activists. My organization, Defuse Nuclear War, helps with things like sign printing and on online infrastructure and publicizing events and things like that. So I just wanted to offer that if anyone's planning any protests or events and you'd like to work with us, we're a resource for activists.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we usually have one here in Burlington. I'll have to connect Pegasus to Robin Lloyd. Okay.
Okay.
I just posted something in the chat when I think about ways to how to localize the meeting room. When I think of ways how to localize the nuclear weapons industry and really make it vivid and real to people in their day-to-day life, because it is something that is it feels abstract. It's behind, barbed wire gates that you can't get behind. Just today, I noticed that there's a STEM summer camp, a science, technology, engineering, math summer camp for kids as young as 5 in Utah that is advertising itself as offering trips to the Promontory plant up in Utah's West Desert, which I would, one, yes, you are visiting a nuclear weapons plant. But 2, on top of that, it literally just exploded a month ago. And, people 5 to 10 miles away said they felt the explosion. And I would think that raising awareness, this is something to bring up when people ask, what does it matter to me that we host nuclear weapons, manufacturing facilities in our backyard? It's 1, they explode, and 2, little kids go on summer camps there. I was quite surprised that the camp was advertising that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Doug. One of the people that used to be involved with this group works at a charter school, which receives funds, I think, from Northrop Grumman, and they want them to take their kids to the Northrop Grumman offices.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I often wonder, all these people who work for like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, what kind of lives do they live? It's
yeah.
Any final questions from anybody before we say goodbye? And
I don't have a question, but I'd just like to thank Taylor for her work and for digging in. I mean, we'd be totally oblivious without the things that you dig up. And
Thank
also
you.
to Emma for her inputs on the situation, that her work with defuse nuclear war sounds very important.
I'll put here in the chat for anyone who likes. We have a newsletter that will get basically any story that I publish or that is published on this beat straight into your inbox. So we, for example, our explosion story, we immediately put in the newsletter.
Well, that's good.
So yeah, if anyone's interested, it's a free newsletter for we call it Military Industrial America. So sort of dispatches from across the military industrial complex. Thank you for having us, Pegasus and Doug.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all so much. It was great to talk to all of you.
Thank you, Pegasus, for letting me know.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. We'll see you all in the future.
Okay, great. Thanks, Peg.
Mhm.